The ANC in Gauteng is calling on businesses to limit the employment of foreign nationals. Leading the call are Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi and ANC Provincial Secretary, that's eNCA. Well, they say it's time for locals to be given priority in the country's economic hub, but it's not that simple. So to discuss this, we're now joined by Sharon Ekambaram, of course, and she's the head of the Refugee and Migrant Rights Program at Lawyers for Human Rights. Sharon, thank you so much for joining me, and a very warm good morning to you. I'm sure you probably have heard the calls by both the Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi and ANC Executive eNCA saying that it's the private sector that actually are not coming to party here. They need to employ more locals than they employ foreign nationals. Your reaction? I think you're muted, Sharon. If you could just check your audio for us, please.
Oh, sorry about that.
No worries. Sure.
You know, I think my response would be to ask the ANC and the policymakers, what problem are we trying to solve? And whether we put in place quotas, whether we chase out all the foreign nationals in our country, and, you know, we have about 3 million people, our brothers and sisters from the African continent, that will not solve the problem of persistent inequalities in our country and the problem of poverty and unemployment. And so this, raising this at this point in time is mere populism and an effort by the ruling party where it's desperate that it's going to lose in the 2024 elections to try and win votes. And a serious concern for us as people who are working on the ground, trying to build social cohesion, dealing with xenophobia, is that, you know, it's a volatile situation. And we are seeing shocking levels of vigilantism and targeting of Black African foreign nationals who are living in our country. And it's a very, very dangerous thing that the politicians, the game that they are playing.
In your view, Sharon, is this more of a scapegoat by the politicians and government officials to scapegoat failures of governance?
It is definitely scapegoating and forcing us to then have this conversation about quotas when we should be asking and holding our government to account for why almost 30 years into our democracy, we still are one of the most unequal societies in the world. And your point around scapegoating is to divert our attention away from the fact that this government has adopted a anti-poor, anti-working class economic policies that have resulted in, you know, a bloodshot shedding of jobs over the last decade or more. And those jobs have never been replaced. People never get employment once they are, you know, forced to leave their places of work. And this has had a serious impact, let alone the fact that COVID and the severe restrictions that were imposed, you know, resulted in massive unemployment, particularly in the informal sector where people were not able to go back and carry on with the work that they were doing when the entire country was experiencing lockdown. And so in order not for us to talk about this and ask the government, what are they doing in proportion to the effect that the poorest in our country suffered during the COVID period, losing jobs, being sent further into poverty, we are now discussing quotas, which is not going to solve any problem. I think that's the point I want to underscore today.
And ideally, Sharon, I mean, what would have been the better, I suppose, resolution coming from both the ANC and government, you know, in this context? What would have been a much better suggestion as opposed to the quota?
So I want to take us back to our constitution, and the core of our constitution is about transforming our country from a past which, as you know, there was unfair privilege that was afforded people based on the color of their skin, and our government, when it got into power, it had the job to transform our country, to address the problems of inequality, where you see suburbs having, better service delivery, where people live with dignity, and townships, informal settlements, people continue to live in abject poverty, and the levels of disrespect for human dignity is shocking. And so they should have been working with the private sector, and I would say enforcing something like a wealth tax that would then be able to enable the government to put in place a non-means tested universal income grant that would immediately lift, millions of people out of a condition of desperation and enable them to then be able to afford basic things like transport, being able to go for an interview, or to use that money to be able to survive in livelihood activities. But instead, we have this shameless blaming of migrants for all our problems, when in fact the Gauteng province, the national government, is guilty of failing to transform our country from a dark, horrible past to one where we could all enjoy the wealth of this country and have more equality and dignity in our life.
Yeah, and as far as the Greater Society, in South Africa is concerned, Sharon, is your concern also that this call by both Panyaza Lesufi and TK Ngqiza, obviously Panyaza in his capacity as Gauteng Premier, TK in his capacity as the ANC's provincial secretary in Gauteng, is your concern that it might, this call might further fuel this almost cloud that migrants or foreign nationals are in South Africa to threaten South Africans' jobs, as opposed to add value through, some of the skills that they have from, some of the companies that they are employed in? If they are attributing, private sector for being a part of the problem and not coming to party, the private sector perhaps could be looking at the skills that they're requiring. And, some migrants and foreign nationals may fit the profile. Are you worried that it may further fuel this threat, that, some in our society may feel that, hey, migrants are here more to threaten job security as opposed to add to the economy?
I mean, I think we all are aware of the dangers of movements like Operation Dudula, who use unlawful means, vigilantism, and are spreading misinformation, lies about foreign nationals in our country. And many politicians, Herman Mashaba, Gauteng McKenzie, and the ANC have all jumped on this bandwagon with the hope that people will vote for them in the elections in 2024. To respond to your point directly, according to South African migration program, they are indicating that 80% of informal enterprises in Gauteng are South African owned. So it's a lie that all the migrants are taking the jobs, whether in the informal sector or in the formal sector, and that South Africans are not being, have the opportunity to get these jobs. The second point is that there is enough research, as you pointed out, to demonstrate that for even one job or livelihood initiative that a foreign national engages in, they employ at least one South African. There is enough research to show the extent to which simple things like renting in a backyard of a South African in an informal settlement or in a township is contributing to that family's ability to be able to deal with, the cost of living has escalated post-COVID. We are all struggling with high levels of prices of petrol and the impact on cost of everyday living. So these are the contributions. But I think that at the same time, it's important to hold the Gauteng government to account, to hold the national government account, on the levels of mismanagement and corruption, which is actually the fuel of why we have poor service delivery, why there is shocking levels of the quality of education, which is also triggering the unemployment problem. And it's also resulting in inequality in our country. And of course, the problems with public health care, the real reasons are corruption and mismanagement. And we are not talking about that. We're not holding this government to account for those problems. And instead, we're talking about migrants and the fact that migrants are taking all the jobs, which is totally untrue.
We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for speaking to me. Sharon Ekambaram, thank you so much for joining me, the head of refugee and migrant rights at Lawyers for Human Rights. Thank you so much for your time right here on eNCA.